Motive and method. True crime stories.
Donald Hume, already notorious for his audacious crimes in England, would go on to make headlines in Switzerland for a shocking act of violence. Using multiple aliases, he carried out a fatal bank robbery in Zürich that left a taxi driver dead, culminating in a high-profile trial that revealed the full extent of his daring, recklessness, and cunning. A resourceful liar, he escaped justice after killing his first victim in a fit of rage. 10 years later, during his final bank robbery spree, he shot dead a taxi driver in Switzerland. Charming, clever, and adventurous, he nonetheless seemed unable to hold on to money. By 7:30 p.m. on Tuesday, 4 October 1949, Donald Hume, a dark-haired, slightly chubby 29-year-old, was walking home with his dog Tony, a shaggy Alsatian cross. He lived in a maisonette above a greengrocer's at 620 Finchley Road, near Golders Green, and had been drinking in a nearby pub. Though the shops were shut, the street was still busy. Outside the terraced building, he spotted a yellow Citroën and immediately tensed. Few people owned Citroën saloons in the austere post-war years, but Hume knew one man who did: Stanley Sethi, a car dealer. Sethi, a 46-year-old Iraqi-born Jew with international contacts, was Hume's partner in black market dealings that had made Hume a great deal of money. Yet Hume intensely disliked him. How Sethi entered the maisonette that evening, when he was murdered, was never established. Hume's wife Cynthia testified that she usually returned home by 6 p.m. with their baby and had never met Sethi. No witness saw him enter the building. It is possible the door was left on the latch and Sethi let himself in. That evening, Mrs. Hume remained upstairs, listening to a radio play, Justice in Other Lands, broadcast from 8 to 9 p.m. Downstairs, Hume was dragging Sethi's body into the coal cupboard. The play was about Henri Landru, the French mass murderer. Sethi was condescending, ostentatiously dressed in expensive coats, ties, and flamboyant jewelry. The yellow Citroën outside, registration CJN 444, was his, and its presence infuriated Hume. Their business meetings were usually held at Sethi's garage or in West End nightclubs. Sethi planned the operations, supplied the contacts, and financed the schemes. This made it vital to Hume that his own base remain independent. The 7-room maisonette he shared with his wife, Cynthia, and their 11-week-old daughter, Alison, was his first real home, and he guarded it jealously. The sight of the Citroën alone was enough to provoke Hume, who was quick to anger. But there was more. Weeks earlier, Hume had visited Sethi's yard in Cambridge Terrace Mews near Regent's Park, bringing his dog Tony. When Tony accidentally clawed one of Sethi's cars, Sethi erupted in obscenities and kicked the dog viciously. Hume muttered an apology and comforted Tony, but was white with rage. Tony meant more to him than anyone. His wife was not even allowed to share the dog, and Hume had bought her one of her own. From that moment, Hume understood that Sethi had no respect for him, seeing him as a small-time underling to be discarded when no longer useful. Now Sethi was in his home. Hume rushed upstairs to the top-floor sitting room, nearly out of breath, to find Sethi lounging on the sofa in a pinstripe suit. "If you come here again, it will be your lot," Hume warned. Sethi mocked him. "Who's going to stop me? You?" he jeered, adding that he would come whenever he pleased. As Hume moved toward him, threatening to throw him down the stairs, Sethi sneered back. "You'll be the one to get slung down." Hume left the room and took from the hallway wall one of his most prized possessions, a German dagger issued to the SS during World War II. He returned, shut the sitting room door, and warned Sethi, "Next time you come here, you'll get this." Sethi contemptuously ignored the threat, fatally underestimating Hume's anger. "Go away, you silly bastard. What are you doing? Playing at soldiers?" he sneered. The words cut deep. "There's no play," Hume replied quietly. When Seti tried to brush him aside, Hume attacked. They fell to the floor, and moments later, Seti's bulky body lay slumped against the sofa, killed by repeated stab wounds to the chest. Hume noticed the open curtains. Anyone across the road could have seen the struggle, and the noise might have carried downstairs. He listened, but there was no alarm. He dragged the body through the dining room, breakfast room and kitchen, pausing often to catch his breath, and hid it in the coal cupboard beneath the sloping roof. He reset the overturned furniture and tried to clean the bloodstains from the carpet, sofa, and the trail to the cupboard, but only made them worse. At 9:30 p.m, he took Seti's ignition key, drove the yellow Citroën to Cambridge Terrace Mews, wiped it for fingerprints, and abandoned it. He returned home by taxi around 10:45 p.m, finding his wife already asleep. After checking the sitting room and coal cupboard, Hume lay awake all night, smoking and planning. The next day, realizing the body was too large to move intact, he decided to dismember it, severing the head and legs and wrapping the remains separately. Brian Donald Hume was born in Swanage, Dorset, in December 1919, though the exact date is unknown. An illegitimate child at a time when such status carried heavy stigma, Hume was acutely sensitive about it. He had little memory of his first 2 years and was sent shortly after his second birthday to an orphanage in Burnham-on-Sea, Somerset. According to Hume's uncorroborated account, the orphanage was run by 3 women. Children slept 8 to a bed and were given jam only on Christmas Day. Discipline was severe. Punishments included hours alone in an unlit cellar and threats of an old green gypsy woman who would appear, swearing and warning she would take misbehaving children away. Hume claimed that, aged about 8, he once chased this figure from the cellar after recognizing her as one of the women, later embellishing the story by saying he carried a chopper. Around that age, he was told he had been adopted and would go to live with his grandmother in Golders Green, North London, close to 620 Finchley Road, where he would kill Stanley Seti more than 20 years later. The following 6 months were the happiest of his childhood. He bonded with Gran, received affection for the first time, and developed a love of cinema, especially violent gangster films. This happiness ended when Gran said he would live with his aunt, known as Aunt Doody, a headmistress near Basingstoke, Hampshire. Hume was told to call her husband, a motor engineer, Uncle Don. 18 months later, Gran died. Hume claimed Aunt Doody then treated him as a nuisance, amid village rumours about her relationship with the boy. A maid told Hume that Aunt Doody was really his mother. From that moment, he said, he hated her. At 14, Hume left Queen Mary's Grammar School and was placed in a job as a live-in kitchen boy in Farnborough, but quit after 3 months. Feeling unwanted at home, he left quietly one night, slept in a haystack and hitchhiked to London. There he visited Somerset House and confirmed the truth. Aunt Doody was his mother, and his father's name had been left blank. Recklessly daring, Hume devised an audacious plan to dispose of the body, a chance at last to prove himself a hero rather than a misfit haunted by his past. Shortly before 3 p.m. on Wednesday, 5th October, Hume drove a hired black Singer saloon down Dagger Lane toward Elstree Airport in Hertfordshire. With him were his dog Tony and 2 blanket-wrapped bundles tied with cord containing parts of Stanley Seti's dismembered body. A 3rd bundle remained in the coal cupboard at Finchley Road. At the control tower, Hume said he wanted to fly to Southend and back. Known to staff, he was given an Auster GAG-XT. He patted Tony goodbye and carried the parcels to the aircraft. Half an hour later, flying at 70 miles per hour and 2,000 feet, Hume turned toward the English Channel. He later said, Desperation drove him on, fearing he could not risk dropping suspicious objects near Southend Pier. With fuel for 3.5 hours, he pushed the flight to the limit, allowing only enough to return. After more than an hour, the French coast appeared through the haze, and the sea below seemed clear of ships. Hume threw the SS dagger and other incriminating items into the water, then jettisoned the 2 bundles and watched until they sank. He turned back toward England, reaching Southend around 4:30 p.m. in poor visibility. Strained and tired, he made a bad landing, stopping in the path of another aircraft. Arranging to collect the oyster the next day, he took a taxi back to Finchley Road, paying with part of £100 he had kept from £1,000 carried by SETI. He had burned the remaining £900 in blood-stained notes and used the rest to clear an overdraft. Hume returned home about 8:30 p.m., his wife Cynthia upstairs. Earlier that day, he had scrubbed the living room, removed the green carpet for cleaning, wiped down surfaces, cut away stained underfelt, and covered abrasions with dark brown varnish. He rang Elstree Airport and arranged for Tony to sleep in the Singer overnight. On Thursday, 6th October, 2 days after the killing, Hume brought in a decorator to varnish the sitting room floor. He collected Tony from Elstree at about 11 a.m., then asked the decorator to help load the remaining bundle from the coal cupboard into the car. At 2:30 p.m., he reached Southend Airport, where the oyster had been refueled. When an engineer asked what the bundle contained, Hume replied, "Fish." After a difficult takeoff, the aircraft climbed to 3,000 feet and headed out over the channel in poor visibility. When the French coast came into view again, Hume descended to 2,000 feet and, almost losing control, released the final bundle. As it struck the sea, its contents floated free. Low on fuel and unable to reach Elstree, he diverted to Gravesend, landing at 6:30 p.m., then took a taxi home with Tony. SETI's disappearance was already headline news. Newspapers focused on the shady car dealer and his famous wad of banknotes. 2 days after SETI had visited Hume's flat, the Daily Express ran the headline, "Dealer with 200 fivers vanishes." Police had been alerted by SETI's sister Eva and her husband, and the Citroën abandoned in Cambridge Terrace Mews had drawn attention. SETI normally garaged the car, and neighbours were surprised to find it outside. One reported hearing it parked on the night of 4th October, a detail Hume read closely. At first, Hume later said, police and reporters seemed off the scent. Investigators assumed SETI had been killed for his £1,000 and searched bomb sites near his known haunts. On Friday, 7th October, Hume went to Southend to collect the Singer and arranged for another pilot to return the oyster from Gravesend. The following day, he read with alarm that police had circulated the serial numbers of the £5 notes SETI had cashed before visiting him. Hume had destroyed most, but others had been paid into his bank or handed to taxi drivers. He later admitted he had not realized the numbers were consecutive and easily traceable. Worse followed. On 14th October, the SETI family offered a £1,000 reward. On Friday, 21st October, parts of SETI's body were found on the Essex mudflats. "My victim's body," Hume later said, "had followed me home." Police inquiries intensified around Southend and Gravesend. At 7:30 a.m. on Thursday, 27th October, detectives surrounded 620 Finchley Road and took Hume to Albany Street Police Station. The inquiry was led by Superintendent Colin McDougall, Chief Inspector John Jameson, and Detective Sergeant Sutherland. It was clear they knew his movements on the days of the flights. "All right," Hume suddenly said, "I'll tell you what happened." He claimed that 3 men, Mac, Greenie and the boy, had paid him £100 in £5 notes to drop 2 parcels from an aircraft, returning the next day with a third parcel and an offer of £50 more. one of them carrying a gun. He said he grew suspicious too late to go to the police, believing they would not listen to someone like him. On Friday, 28 October, Hume was charged with murder at Bow Street Police Station. "No," he said, "I am absolutely not guilty." The trial of Donald Hume for the murder of Stanley Setti opened at the Old Bailey on the 18th of January 1950 before Mr. Justice Lewis. The prosecution was led by Christmas Humphreys, while Hume, represented by R.F. Levy, K.C., pleaded not guilty. Now 30, Hume made little effort to look respectable. His defense partly relied on portraying him as a shady character, afraid to trust the police. He appeared tough and slightly menacing in a check jacket and flannel trousers, with none of the RAF tie he had worn at his first remand hearing at Bow Street on the 30th of October. Little of the evidence was seriously disputed. The prosecution had carefully traced Hume's movements to Elstree and Southend, along with the trail of Setti's £5 notes. When Hume was committed for trial on the 16th of November, 23 prosecution witnesses had already been assembled. Hume's account of Mac, Greenie, and the boy amounted to an admission of involvement in a serious crime. If the jury concluded he was lying, he would almost certainly hang. In his opening speech, Humphreys said the case would rest largely on circumstantial evidence. He described Setti briefly as a pavement car dealer and dismissed Hume's story of the three men as a complete fantasy, existing only in Hume's fertile and romantic imagination. On the morning of 19 January, Mr. Justice Lewis fell ill and was replaced by Mr. Justice Sellers. A new jury was sworn in, and Humphreys announced he would forego an opening speech, inviting the jury to judge the case on the evidence alone. On the third day, 20 January, Hume's full police statement was read to a silent court by Superintendent McDougall. The jury's reactions revealed nothing. Under cross-examination, Levy drew useful admissions. A thorough search of the maisonette had produced no fingerprints belonging to Setti, consistent with the defense claim that the body had been brought there in parcels. No bloodstains were found on Hume's clothing. Levy opened the defense case on Monday, 23 January. "Hume does not pretend to be an angel," he told the jury. "He may be an exhibitionist, but not every liar is a murderer." He challenged the prosecution's claim that Setti had been attacked, killed, and dismembered in the flat, while Mrs. Hume was present for much of the time. Levy also questioned the forensic evidence of Dr. Henry Holden, director of the Metropolitan Police Laboratories. Dr. Holden had found human bloodstains on the cleaned and dyed sitting room carpet, on hallway linoleum, between floorboards, and on plaster and timbers in the flat below. The blood was Group O, Setti's group, but one shared by 4 in 10 people. Levy suggested the carpet stains could not have been blood, as they had survived cleaning without marking the underfelt. Hume then gave evidence. Pale but composed, he repeated his story of Mac, Greenie, and the boy, offering far more detail than before. Mac, he said, was thick-set, fair-haired, and in his 30s. Greenie wore a flashy green suit with wide trousers and suede shoes, stood about 5'6" or 7", and was possibly Greek or Cypriot. The boy had a receding forehead, sometimes wore steel-rimmed glasses, and favoured bright brown buckled shoes. The added detail made the men seem plausible rather than memorised inventions. After 2 hours, Humphreys began his cross-examination. Asked what he thought the parcel contained, Hume said he suspected it might be part of a human body, but denied it was obvious or that he linked it to Setti's disappearance. Humphreys read back Hume's own statement, in which he had admitted suspecting the parcels held Setti's remains. Pressed on why he had not gone to the police, Hume said he had been terrified. "Why not, if you are an honest man?" Humphreys asked. Angry now, Hume replied, "I am not saying I am 100% honest. I am a semi-honest man, but I am not a murderer."
The cross-examination continued the next morning, the 5th day of the trial. Hume described cleaning blood that had dripped from the parcels. At one point, his counsel angrily interrupted, accusing the prosecution of misrepresenting the evidence. The exchange seemed to embolden Hume. When Humphreys suggested Setti had been murdered and dismembered in the maisonette, Hume replied, "Absolute baloney," and began answering questions prematurely, drawing a rebuke from Mr. Justice Sellers. Provoked further, Hume flared when accused of lying. "I am the one who knows whether I killed Setti or not, other than the men who murdered him," he said, insisting he had a clear conscience. When the judge remarked that he was treating the case as personal, Hume replied, "My life is a personal matter." Asked if he could locate Mac, Greenie and the boy again, Hume said no. Cynthia Hume then gave evidence. Her composed appearance may have helped the defence. She said she had seen nothing unusual on 4th or 5th of October, no blood and no knives, and insisted her husband could not have dismembered a body in the flat without her knowing. She said it was impossible for a murder to have occurred before about 9 p.m. without her hearing a disturbance, and that she would have remembered if Hume had not gone to bed later that night. Under cross-examination, she admitted she knew little of her husband's activities and nothing of the 3 alleged visitors. In his closing speech, Levy stressed the absence of any evidence of noise or disturbance. Neighbours, Cynthia Hume, the cleaning woman, and the decorator had heard or seen nothing. He argued that the murder must have involved several men, and that Mac, Greenie, and the boy were responsible. Humphreys focused on the bloodstains and Hume's admission that he had disposed of Setti's body, dismissing the 3 men as a fabrication, and arguing that, if Setti arrived alive at the flat, Hume must have taken part in killing him. In summing up, Mr. Justice Sellers carefully outlined the strengths and weaknesses of both cases, emphasising that the jury must judge Hume's reliability where his evidence conflicted with others. At 12:30 p.m. on the 7th day, the jury retired. They returned at 3 p.m., unable to agree. Humphreys declined to seek a retrial, and a fresh jury was formally instructed to return a verdict of not guilty. Hume still faced a charge of being an accessory to murder. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 12 years' imprisonment. He bowed to the judge and was led away to the cells.
On 25th of May, 1958, a bespectacled, moustached man in a dark blue suit presented a passport at Ringway Airport, Manchester. It bore the name Stephen Bird, a chemical engineer from Mortlake, Surrey, but the traveller was Donald Hume, flying to Zürich on business. Hume had been released from Dartmoor Prison on 1st of February, just over 8 years after his Old Bailey sentence, having earned the maximum 1/3 remission. On release, he made £2,000 selling his story to British newspapers and carried the money illegally when he arrived at Ringway. He had no ties. Cynthia had divorced him, and his dog Tony had been put to sleep. Arriving at Zürich's Cloten Airport, Hume said he was rearing to go. Flush with cash and plans, he began posing not as the dull Stephen Bird, but as Johnny Bird, a Canadian test pilot based in Montreal. He soon took up with a Swiss hairdresser, Trudy Sommer. The hard-drinking lifestyle drained his funds, and he looked for a way to replace them. Switzerland was just the place for me, he later said. The banks seemed a pushover, so kind, so gentle, so unsuspecting. By late July 1958, Hume changed tack. He would rob banks elsewhere and use Switzerland as a base. He flew to London, later remarking that if a bank were robbed there, no one would point the finger at him. Staying at a hotel in Baker Street, central London, Hume surveyed several banks and chose the Midland Bank in Boston Manor Road, Brentford. At 9 a.m. on 2nd August, he left his luggage at an air terminal and arrived carrying a canvas bag. He passed 2 hours playing pocket chess, then went inside to ask about opening an account, saying he would return later. At 1 minute to noon, he came back. When the doors closed to new customers at midday, Hume was alone with the staff. He pulled an automatic revolver. "This is a stick-up, and I'm not kidding," he shouted. When cashier Frank Lewis protested, Hume shot him in the stomach. He then tied up the remaining 3 staff and demanded cash. Within minutes, about £1,500 was in his bag. Told the rear safes held only ledgers, he left at about 12:10 p.m., telephoned for a doctor, and caught a train at Kew Bridge. Just over 24 hours later, he arrived in Zürich via Paris as Stephen Bird. His girlfriend, Trudy Sommer, was beginning to realize there was more to him than aviation. Before the raid, Hume had claimed to be a CIA agent, later adding that he tested aircraft for the US Air Force in Europe. Relieved to read that the Brentford robbery had not been linked to him, Hume was angered by reports that he had missed a large sum in the vaults. Determined on revenge, he waited 3 months for the publicity to fade, then returned to London on 5th November, checking into a Kensington hotel as Donald Brown. The next day, he learned the Brentford branch had moved a quarter of a mile away. At 2:58 p.m. on 12th November, just before closing, Hume burst into the new branch with 2 guns, repeating, "This is a stick-up." This time, the staff fled through the rear and locked him in. He grabbed what cash he could from the counters, heard the alarm, and tried to escape. When manager Eric Ayres attempted to stop him, Hume shot him. Like Lewis, Ayres survived but recovered slowly. Hume fled via Kew Bridge, evaded police, leapt from a moving train, and reached Heathrow, returning to Zürich as Stephen Bird. The second raid yielded only £300. Back in Zürich, Hume brooded. He and Trudy were engaged, but money was tight and her suspicions were growing. When she found one of his guns, Hume claimed he was a Soviet, not American, spy. He spent much of December 1958 in Canada under an unknown alias and returned to Zürich with £1,700, still insufficient. He decided to revive his original plan, robbing a bank in Switzerland. On the morning of Friday, 30th January 1959, Hume, calling himself Johnny Bird, entered the Gewerbe Bank on the Ramesstrasse in central Zurich. Exhausted and nervous after little sleep, he wore brown trousers, a grey jacket and a blue pullover, carrying a cardboard box containing a revolver. Without a word, he set the box on the counter and fired through it, injuring cashier Walter Schenkel. He vaulted the partition and struck another cashier, Edwin Hugh, but Schenkel managed to trigger the alarm. Hume seized loose cash and fled, pursued by a crowd led by Hugh. When Hume turned to fire, the gun jammed. Almost breathless, he reached a nearby taxi rank. Seeing the chase, 50-year-old driver Arthur Marg tried to stop him. This time, the revolver worked. Marg fell fatally wounded. Hume was quickly overpowered by the crowd and had to be protected by police on their arrival. In custody, Hume tried desperately to conceal his identity, later saying he ranted and raved to hide the fact that he was Donald Brown, formerly Hume. The Swiss police soon uncovered the truth and contacted Scotland Yard, and together they reconstructed his movements since May 1958. At the district prison, Hume was examined by psychiatrist Dr. Guggenbuhl Craig, who concluded he was legally sane when he shot Marg. Hume made no attempt to deceive him. The fight had gone out of him. "This is the end of the line for me," he told Dr. Hans Stotz, head of the Zurich detective force. Hume's trial for the murder of Arthur Marg opened in Winterthur on 24th of September 1959, nearly 8 months after his arrest, and lasted 5 days. He faced charges of murder, attempted murder, armed robbery, threats to life, and violations of foreign residency regulations. Hume initially stated that he accepted the prosecution's case. The trial was repeatedly disrupted by Hume, who wore earphones to hear an interpreter and was closely guarded by 2 officers. On the first day, he threatened the court president, Dr. Hans Gut, saying, "You tell him that if it comes to a slanging match, I will rip him to bits physically," though the threat was not translated. Under Swiss procedure, the court president questioned the defendant directly. "Why did you need the pistol?" Dr. Gut asked. "I felt lonely," Hume replied. He recounted his London bank robberies, his life in Switzerland, and his activities as Johnny Bird. When asked why he attempted the doomed Zürich robbery, Hume said thoughtfully, "It's difficult to say. I didn't want my conscience to brand me as a coward." At times he grew coarse and abusive, praising the 16-year-old clerk who chased him. "That young fellow Fitz deserves any reward from the Midland Bank. The others only joined in afterwards." Hume had not pleaded insanity or diminished responsibility, leaving little for his counsel to argue. On the 30th of September, the jury retired and returned 3 hours later, finding him guilty on all counts. Switzerland had no capital punishment, so he was sentenced to life imprisonment with hard labor. He said nothing in response. As he was led down the courthouse steps in chains, Hume tried to kick a photographer, and several guards were needed to bundle him into the police van back to prison. That was a Motive and Method production. If you would like to hear more true crime stories, hit the follow and subscribe button.
Motive and Method. True crime stories.